Just to introduce myself, my name is Madison. I'm 23 years old and I live in Sacramento, California, but I go to church in Stockton at Lighthouse of the Valley, Pastor and Sister Delgado's church. I've been going there for maybe 10 plus years or so. But I was asked to share my testimony, which I'm not gonna lie, it's a little scary to have to publicly share intimate details of your life, but you know what, God gives us the grace to share those things because there's somebody who needs to hear it. So I'm gonna go ahead and get into it. But first and foremost, I just kind of want to start off with the foundation of how important it is to wait on the Lord, which for somebody like me who is not the most patient person in the world is a very hard thing to do. And quite frankly, I'm still learning how to wait and be patient and trust in God and His timing and what He has for me in my life. I really want to hone in and focus on my singles and even my young couples who are considering getting married, how important it is to be patient and wait on God. Being single and being in a relationship are two totally different things, but they share something that's very important, which is making sure that God has done what He needed to do in you first before you make a commitment like marriage. Because let's be honest, anybody that's considering a relationship, well, hopefully, but anybody who's considering a relationship or anybody that's in a committed relationship is going to think about marriage at some point in time. And you can be in a relationship with somebody that, you know, maybe that you're supposed to be with. But if you haven't allowed God to do what He needs to do in you first, there's going to be a lot of heartache, a lot of pain, a lot of frustration unnecessarily that you could have avoided had you just listened. And so my testimony here is hopefully just a reminder and or a warning if necessary, not to rush God's time. We can slow down the process of what God wants us to do using our own free will decisions if we put our will before His. The reason I feel confident in, posing those thoughts and that warning is because I was once engaged. You can see that there is no wedding ring on my finger. So as you can imagine, I am no longer engaged. I am a single young woman. And that point in my life was very hard to have to go through. Not the engagement, rather the aftermath. So I'll kind of give you some context. When I was 17, I got into my first serious relationship. And for me, my dad was not about dating until you were 18. So me and my boyfriend at the time did a lot of praying and seeking God that the Lord would impress upon my dad's heart, like to allow me to date him. And, you know, it ended up working out and, you know, our relationship lasted about 4.5 years. But honestly, even in the middle of those 4.5 years, there was a lot of things that, you know, I wish I would have worked on, that I wish I would have allowed God to fix and mend. A lot of brokenness, a lot of pain that happened in my youth, in my preteen years, when I'm already, you know, as a young woman facing identity issues that you already face when you're a teenager. But this part of my life had layered on even more trauma and issues that I had buried deep, I hadn't really addressed. And so I had gotten into this relationship with this awesome person, but I was inside, you know, having to deal with a lot of those internal issues that I hadn't worked out. Mainly because when you get into a relationship, you have to be vulnerable. How else are you supposed to make it, you know, how else are you supposed to be yourself if you're not going to be vulnerable with that person? So those issues started to come up and they started to seep into my relationship. And unfortunately, you know, whereas in the beginning, God was the foundation, I started focusing more and more and more on those issues, seeping into my relationship rather than actually fixing the root of the problem. And so as time went on, you know, we tried to just sweep some things under the rug and try to say, we'll figure it out later. And as time went on, when maybe I was about 20 and he was like 22, I believe at the time, I had finished college and everything, or I was actually just about to finish college. And I was like, well, wherever I go next is where I'm gonna stay. And so we had a conversation about what our relationship was going to look like, and marriage seemed to be the most logical next step, even though the reality of it was neither one of us was ready at the time to make that commitment. Our relationship was our relationship, but a marriage, that's an intense commitment that no one should ever take lightly. And so, we got engaged, and being so young, of course, people had their concerns. We're like, nah, it's gonna be okay. We're gonna figure it out, all this other stuff. And we went to, premarital counseling, what you normally would do. And, even our pastors and family and friends were like, there's no rush. Like, you guys don't have to rush. But I think maybe he was listening more than I'm the type of person where if I have my mind set on something, I'm going for it. And I think maybe he was hesitant to kind of be like, well, yeah, but we were already full throttle. And I was like, no, we've already made the announcement. Like, we're just going to have to figure it out, which was not God's will, as I realized later on when that engagement ended. And I believe that had I just been patient with the Lord, had I took my individual relationship with God more serious than what I was at the time, if I had allowed God to complete or even begin to complete the finished work that he had within me, we would have had a different outcome. So the relationship, unfortunately, ended 2 months before we were supposed to get married. And that was the hardest experience of my life. I spent the last 2 years trying to figure out, what did I do wrong? What was wrong with me? How could I do this? How could I do that? Fortunately, I knew at the very least that in this time I needed to cling on to God tighter than I had ever done. And somebody very close to me within the past year had continually reminded me of how important it is to allow God to do what he needs to do. And when I finally put my hands in the air and I was like, God, I surrender my life. I was living for God, but I hadn't really surrendered my life and my desires to him. And once in my pain and my anger and my agony did I decide, God, I have nothing left. Like, this is all yours now, is when God really did the work that he needed to do, healing me from pain, allowing me to address those things, fixing things about myself that I did not like and I didn't like who I was becoming, really getting a grip on those issues, reminding me of what he has called me to be in ministry, in his church, for his kingdom. Once I had put my hands in the air, God was able to do what he wanted to do outside of my will. And it paid off. And that's not to say that the road was easy. It wasn't. But I made a conscious decision to speed up a process that didn't need to be sped up. It should have stayed in the slow moving motion that it needed to stay in, because I believe in being patient with God and what he wanted to do in my life. I would have had a grip on those issues a lot sooner. I wouldn't have had to go through pain. He and I, meaning me and my boyfriend at the time, wouldn't have had to have gone through the pain of having to break up and cancel a wedding and all this trauma, all this unnecessary issue that God didn't want us to have. And so I come to you with the most sincere plea to not rush anything. Wait on God. Allow God, even in your relationship, to do what he desires to do. You don't always have to break up, but if there's some things that you or your significant other needs to pan out before you can make any more commitment to one another, then you need to do that. Pray. Make sure that the next step is the next step that God wants you guys to go on, because it will save you from unnecessary pain and agony and trauma that no one needs to go through, that it's not the will of God for us to go through. But I believe that when we make our own decisions, we forfeit the peace that God has when we follow his direction. But at the same time, even if you do fall short, even if you do speed up when God said slow down, even if you do stumble and fall, the Lord said in his word that all things work together for the good of those that love God and that are called according to his purpose. So even your mistakes can be used for the glory of God as a testimony. This is my mistake is now my testimony, and I believe that I became stronger. I'm not perfect. I fall short. I still, get sad. I'm just being honest. It was a painful thing. There are regrets that came that God didn't want me to have to feel. But I have to answer to my decisions and my choices. But again, all things work together. All things work together for me. And it is my testimony to share with other young people that it is okay to be patient. It is okay to wait and to trust that God has your best intentions and to just enjoy your time with him. God isn't so far away. He's not this entity that's so disconnected from you that he can't be a close and dear father, a close and dear friend. Spend time with God. And I promise you, that time, that effort, pursuing God the way that you should will never, ever, ever be in vain. So I hope this encouraged somebody. And yeah.